Welcome, dirty peasants, to episode 86 of Wartwood Gazette, the Amphibia podcast. This week, we'll be giving 3 tips for Season 3 discussion of Amphibia. I'm your host, Nabaticon, and join me today, we have Nick.
Everybody.
Thanks, Nick, for coming on. So, news this week. So, we're recording on October 29th. So, a few weeks ago, we had the Disney villain takeover, like theme song takeover. Sorry, not theme song takeover. It was just like a broken karaoke. That's what it was. It had Darcy and Doofenshmirtz doing most of like the singing. There's a little bit of Andreas, which is great because like Keith David has like a really good singing voice, and there's a lot of like cameos from like villains throughout the years, like from Disney animation. Like you had what's the name of the Gargoyles villain? Xanthios?
Oh yes, I think so. I mean, I haven't seen Gargoyles, but I think you're right. Yeah, a lot of like obscure villains showed up there. Like it was like I liked the short, but it was also very funny how you could tell, man. I mean, that show is not built to animate some of them, so it looked it looked so funny. It was so I think it was accidentally funny in so many ways. Like I don't know. So you know that Josh came over list, and it was just only like Darcy and Doof had like an actual like pose, while the rest of them were just like I don't know. They just looked like PNG files. You know what I mean? Just PNG files slapped on to to the clip. Like it was just I don't know. Like you just have to see it for yourself. Like, it was I don't know, y'all. I don't know.
Yeah, and there's like a lot of like there's like a Brandy and Mr. Whiskers like villain that I never even thought about that show like for so many years until that guy showed up, like the
Yeah.
chameleon, and then like Chuckles, the silly piggy from Dave the Barbarian. Those were the two that like got me like thinking, man, I'm old. But but also today, Matt just posted. Well, not today. When at the time you're listening to this, it's probably been like a few weeks ago. His Halloween artwork of Polly post series with one of the snurts, the sparrow snail combos. But I think that's it for Amphibia news or content in this case. I guess we can go right into the topic for today. So we've covered season 1 tips, season 2 tips. Like keep in mind this is just our opinion on like kind of how to enhance discussion around season 3.
Yeah.
And I think Nick, you had a really good first point once again, like kind of like summarizing season discussion where it's point number 1 or tip number 1. You're right.
Yeah.
Be nice.
Yeah. Like it's because I won't lie, yeah. If you do go back to a season 3 episode when we were like knee deep in the war that was 3A discussion. Okay. We did spend a lot of time trying to like counter every single hateful point we could, but looking back, yeah, I can admit, I feel like a lot of feelings were in the right place. Like a lot of feelings, like a lot of things I look back on, I'm like, okay, yeah, they were absolutely correct what they were saying, but I still stand with thinking that the show just deserves way more like goodwill than what it got, right? Like it's like I guess I could summarize this. I mean, shoot, like, yeah, if you find a flaw in something, like that's all fair game, right? Like that's everything's inherently flawed. Like you're not like it's okay for you to think like, okay, this isn't right. This is sort of messing up my overall feeling for work. Like that all makes sense. But it's when we get to the point you're not really acknowledging the other like strengths of something, right? Like you have to be honest with yourself. Like, are you because yeah, this is one of the tips I was talking before, right? Like be honest with yourself. Like, are you like when you throw 3A into the dumpster, or just honestly season three in general, is there anything you're missing? Right? Like I think like like I said, just yeah, again summarize just yeah, lots of the complaints were sound, but they just threw the series into the trash, without acknowledging any of its sound parts, like the planters, like Ant's arc, like literally everything that actually made any of these episodes good. And I wish I just had a better direction for all these points, but yeah, it's just I mean, I think again, I'll finish after making this point. I think media in general, like they're like a very complex. I feel like people should I feel like the way that people look at other complex arts, they should also respect TV and film on that level too, right? Because it's not something there's like multiple different ways you can enjoy something. There's like different levels that you can claim that something did like something right on, right? And I do think it's important to like try to acknowledge as much as you can so you can really get to like the center of a work because there's almost always more than meets the eye. So I'm gonna go with that quote, but but like, yeah, I don't know, just like that word to me,
Yeah, like
like try to
I
acknowledge
get what
God.
you mean, Nick, because it's like you have so say like maybe season three didn't do something well enough for like you, the viewer, and it's like and you can maybe you'll not I don't want to say blame, but the responsibility of entertaining you is on the crew, and maybe they were like had to deal with Disney interfering or something else interfering, like, and you don't need to be like there doesn't need to be absolutes. Like you can't just say like, oh, they didn't season three didn't do what I wanted it was because Matt and the crew couldn't are bad writers or something. And it's
Yeah,
like I'm trying to avoid going into the second tip, but stuff like, oh, Anne didn't react enough to like Sasha and Marcy. That's okay. That's fair. Like that's maybe there could have been another way. That's fine. But then to say that like all of season three was kind of like a waste, or so all season three A
yeah,
in this case was kind of like did nothing for you. That's fair too. But then saying like that I didn't accomplish anything is kind of disingenuous.
yeah. It's yeah, because again, I think that people just need to acknowledge that like there's a difference between like what they personally want from a work and how they can actually like fully engage with something. Because I think yeah, a lot of times I'll just notice that. And yeah, this is like all totally fair, but it's just yeah. I mean, I think people they do because like when you see online discussion, like people are there, not just to share their thoughts, but just to like really try to engage with something as and I hate using this word, but as objectively as I can. But you can't really do that if you're not really taking in everything that something's like, trying to do.
And yeah, and there's gonna be moments where like, okay, for example, the new normal, you can complain about like someone might bring up, oh, okay, like they ruined the tone with the Wi-Fi joke, and then you don't want to reply with kind of whining about like, oh, because Disney wants to make it funnier, like sometimes instead of like being kind of like you don't need to like use Disney's involvement as like a shield. You can kind of just say, "Yeah, that's true," and then just move on. Because then, just to avoid like some kind of like repetitive back and forth about like, oh,
Yeah,
like you're talking less about the show and then more about just like the outside factors affecting the show.
yeah. I mean, honestly, I'll admit this. I think something I realized like a little too late. I think like, because I used to ask myself like, okay, how, like, why is this such a deal breaker to so many people? Like, why are they not? Because again, so this is like the thing. Because I don't know, it's weird. Because I think like if you just if you were like an outsider to all this, like you've never seen a video and you're just basing like how the show is functioning off what everyone was saying. It's like you would imagine that season three doesn't have like a story at all, right? Like it's not even doing anything, right? But like I used to get really frustrated with that, I guess. But then like I think I realized like a few years after I was like, oh wait, the Infinity fandom, dude. There's a bunch of babies in there, right? Like they're just a bunch of kids. Like I don't think they're just a bunch of kids. I do think when you get older and you see more stuff, you start to realize that okay, yeah, naturally there are just going to be some things that didn't work out for me and some things that really did, and yeah, and like a lot of times things are just going to be fine, right? Like these are professionals making this stuff. Like I think they it's their job to know how to tell a story, how to draw things, right? Like more often than not, you're just I feel like it's just going to be like your mileage may vary. So sometimes it's not even going to be like it's not even going to be like an outright flaw, right? Like it'll just be like okay, this works for me, this doesn't work for me, but this works for other people, and that's okay. Like you're going to come to that conclusion. And there's also just going to be okay, this is a flaw that's really bugging me, but it's like so minuscule to everything else that the work is providing that I just don't really that yeah that other people just don't really care, right? Like all that's just natural, and I think like yeah, and I think like in the whole spirit of this, I think like Amphibia is just like a very yeah. If you put up Amphibia to other shows, it's like okay, it's it's not as crazy, right? Like I think with cartoons, it's like in that spirit, there's not like another show like Amphibia, right? Like there's not another cartoon that like tries to do all these things in the animated medium. But yeah, I do think because of that, people who are just people who only watch cartoons, like sorry to say it, people who only watch like cartoons. It's like they aren't used to the idea of something not abiding by everything they want. Right. So I think that's just why we saw so many reactionary takes. It's why every single week was about like Martin and Sasha. It's why we couldn't just like actually focus on the work's intentions and just stick to that, right? Like that's what's so good about these retrospective episodes. Like I'm just able to like realize, okay, here's why it was actually like this, and somehow get through this after after everything.
Yeah, well said, Nick. Uh, I don't think I have anything else to add for this one. I think. Do you want to go on to the next one?
Yeah,
Okay. So the second point, second tip is just because the status quo changes doesn't mean the tone will shift as well. Because I feel like people have already talked about this by now, but True Colors had like its finale, and then we got into season three, and people were kind of expecting like the same kind of tone to carry over into season three, and I feel like the kind of tone that people were kind of wanting from season three, based on True Colors, it wasn't the whole episode. They were kind of more focused on like the last 7 minutes,
Yeah.
which is not sustainable. Like, because even like the first half of True Colors is still kind of, I don't want to say silly, but it's still very like, I don't want to say lighthearted. Like, I feel like the first half of True Colors, more than that, is like was very like, I don't want to say standard Amphibia, but very like it meshed very well with like the season or the series in general with like the jokes and the humor and like the character interactions.
Yeah.
And I think more people were focused on like the mature part, like the adult part.
The aura.
The part where where we can be all serious about liking cartoons.
Yeah. That. Oh my God. Yeah.
And like we mentioned earlier with the first point, like there's like some plot points that people wanted more of that they may have not have gotten. But this wasn't really an issue with going from season 1 to season 2 after Reunion, which I feel like people forget how kind of dark Reunion was as well. But
Yeah.
and how like season 2 addressed it was kind of the same way the new normal kind of addressed it in the same regard, but I think because of like we were going to a new place, like that's where I'm I'm trying to be really like kind. But like but basically it's like because Anne came back to Earth, everyone was kind of expecting like a very serious kind of plot line about child disappearances
Yeah.
that they didn't get.
Yeah. That's. Yeah.
And I know people are gonna say like I've seen this argument before where it's like, oh, just because it's a children's show doesn't mean we have to like excuse it for doing stuff for kids. It's like it's easy saying that, but at the same time it's like if you're writing a show for kids, like I understand that like you can't that to like go through all like the network stuff. It's like that's its own hurdle. And of course like the crew, they try to push the boundary as much as they can. But Amphibia for the past like 2 seasons has already had like this tone, this like kind of tone or mood that's worked for them. And then asking them to kind of like reinvent the wheel for the final season doesn't really make sense to me. Like
Yeah.
are there any shows where it's like I know there's plenty of shows that start off like light or lighthearted and then like okay, do you know any shows that start like very lighthearted but then end very like have seasons that feel like
Yeah.
very like different from what came before? And I don't mean in terms of like plot line or characters, but just like
Like tonally.
yeah, like tonally like complete change. Like because even like I can't think of a show that's like unrecognizable from like the first season compared to the last. Like what? Like even Adventure Time like still has like its own kind of
Yeah. Like it's like I would love. I mean, I'm taking the chance, but I guess yeah, I would say Evangelion, but it's I don't know because I think it would like yeah, it's a very it gets dark. Like I would say, like the first two thirds are like are actually like surprisingly lighthearted and comedic, and then like it's that last third that just gets like darker and darker and darker and darker, and so like yeah, we have a very dark finale, controversial, blah 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 blah. But I don't know. It's one of those things that it does stay true to itself all the way to the end. So it's like, and I'm not like, huh, like kind of feel like what Amphibia did. So I, I don't know. Yeah, it's I pretty much agree with you though. Like it's yeah, like a status quo change does not equal a need for a tone shift. Like it's like it never like it probably never was because with Ava, like I think a tone shift with Ava, in Ava's case, yeah, tone shift was necessary to what was going on, but that was just like that's just linked up with like Don, I guess it's sort of breaking the rules trying to game, but yeah, it was sort of linked up with what was going on with one major character behind the scenes, right? Like basically all his plans came to fruition, that started screwing everyone else over, but it wasn't like this like, oh, this big thing happened, now everything can never be the same again. Like, no, no. So yeah, I mean just to go on to Amphibia here, it's like honestly, yeah, because again, yeah, we've talked about it a million times. It's like sure, I'm like losing my thought here, but I think what I was going to say is that shoot,
Yeah, because like
like
we've
I
kind of
lost
seen
it.
how no,
Go
it's all right because we've seen over like the course of the seasons, like Amphibia like does their season in a certain way, like has their own formula, and then as we get closer to the finale, that's where they kind of get a bit more serious while still keeping that humor. We saw it for season
yeah,
one, we saw it for
yeah,
season two, and we saw it for season three, but it's like it feels like people were more shocked that season three followed the same pattern where it's like you have the season and then you got the mid-season finale where there's like some sort of like new status quo change. In case of season one, it's like the Toad stuff. Season two was going back to Wartwood after Utopia, and then season three, it's like going back to Amphibia after being on Earth. It's like it's these same trends, and we still like everything, but it's like for some reason in the moment everyone's like complaining.
yeah. It's very yeah, because it's like I'm not trying to be that guy, but it's like it does create that. Wait, do you actually like Amphibia when it's being Amphibia? Like, right? Like, do you actually like Amphibia? Like, it's because the problem never was like, oh, the show isn't being dark. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it in previous episodes, right? I think it just there are certain plot lines that yeah just needed to be acknowledged more, just to make the season feel more complete and blah 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 blah. But I think yeah, people got again, it's another thing we talk about so much. It's people wanting Amphibia to be like this dark, serialized, super serious action fantasy show when it's more like this, yeah, this episodic character driven comedy. Like, I'm sorry, like it's leaning on the ladder, and like I think people they'll eventually get their former one day. Like it's coming, it has to, but like give Amphibia a break. Like that's what just give Amphibia a break. Like leave it alone. That's like that's my take.
Yes, like I feel like if someone says like for season three that they didn't address the fallout from True Colors, it's kind of code for I wanted more about Marcy and Sasha.
Yeah, yeah. It's like that's just like they want. It's weird. Yeah, because again, it's like they wanted something that misaligns with the focus of the series. Like it's like, okay, I wanted the trauma they should have gotten from that episode to be the focus of the season, right? Like they just, I don't know. It's that weird want because I don't. At the same time, it doesn't feel unfair. Like it's just one of those weird things. Like it feels like yeah, I feel like I could see Amphibia making like maybe like a plot out of it or something for an episode, but it's like again, it's just again. I keep saying it, but yeah, it's like one of those things we've talked about. I think like Amphibia unfortunately just came out. It's just its own original thing. The creator wasn't thinking about like any trends they wanted to follow. They just saw some cool stuff that came before. They had their own ideas for a story, and then they just combined it and made their own original work, right? And right now, I think like with everything going on, I feel like it's how hyper aware of the kind of stories we're getting now. I think yeah, people with Nvidia, they just they just wanted something very specific, and they didn't get it, and it just created all these weird standards that were just unfair to it.
Yeah. And I think we can go into our last point, if that's all right with you.
That's all good.
Okay. So, tip number three, you can compare other shows to Amphibia, but just don't forget to contrast. So, like I noticed like all these like all of our points for season three are kind of like are more series related, which is fine. I just feel like with regard to season three, with how like everything kind of wraps up, it's more likely for people to kind of compare the ends and look at the series as a whole when they're comparing other shows. So like, we've seen Amphibia compared to like Gravity Falls and the Owl House. Um, I guess with regards to season three, Amphibia definitely is more of like an outlier in this case because Gravity Falls ended with season two. The Owl House had its shortened season. Um, and sometimes these comparisons are kind of like like this show did this better, and then that's kind of like about it. And like, and I've seen people kind of say like, oh, like you can't compare these two together, and that's fair as well. But I feel like if you are going to compare a show to another, just kind of like you should have like a better point than just, oh, this does this better, therefore this show good, this show bad.
Yeah,
Like,
like it's oh god.
no, I feel like a good way people have done this was kind of comparing the Owl House and Amphibia endings because they're very. No one's kind of like. I think no one. I haven't seen really people like say one ending's better than the other because I feel like everyone at least has like a good understanding that like these shows have two very different endings. Like, and their
Yeah,
endings are very much like a product of like the series itself and not like just how everything should end this way or that way. Um,
unless you're Starburst. Yeah,
like, because I feel like in regards to like, I'm trying not to like dunk on Gravity Falls, but it's like everyone talks about how like Gravity Falls had this like overarching storyline and the plot points, and it's like
mhm.
did it
Yeah,
though? Like,
yeah.
you had all those like codes we had to like decipher at like 2 a.m. where it's like, oh, the mustard stain isn't coming out of my shirt, and like a bunch of guys are like trying like 20 different like cipher decoding things to like get that message to work, and then and it's like it added to the experience, but it didn't, which is great, but it didn't add much to the plot.
Yeah, it's because that's just the funny because again, man, it's like I would I would be that contrarian asshole who's gonna go against Again, I already have been when we talk about Gravity Falls, and it's like, dude, I mean, I think even Alex Hirsch, like, if you listen to his like Blu-ray commentary disc, whatever, like, hey, he did mention that he'd want continuity in the show, but to him, it was still this funny episodic comedy. Like he put because if he was more concerned about just creating this overall plot, I feel like there would have been more episodes where he just sacrificed the quality on it. But no, he just wanted to create these. He just wanted every episode to be as enjoyable as possible. So I feel like, yeah, for me, it's like I feel like you're kind of just sacrificing the fun of the show if you're really just constantly focusing on like, oh, what is this ketchup stain? That's on the wall. Like it's just I don't know, like the mystery and stuff. That was part of the experience. It was super fun, but dude, I'm like, y'all, you guys. He still wanted to create a fun cartoon. Like, are you actually looking at like, are you really acknowledging what the show is, or are you just like caught in like the zeitgeist? Like, I don't know any other way to describe it, but I feel like something like what you were describing earlier with like what did you see specifically? I think you mentioned something about trends. I can't remember, but I think like yeah, I don't know. It's just the idea that people they're more caught in like
Oh, like more caught in the
the
experience of
commerce.
the show and the conversation than the actual show itself.
Yeah. The conversation, the surrounding conversation, the discourse, the culture around that show, instead of the actual show itself, right? Like people aren't speaking from the show's point of view, but instead like what the overall like way people talk about it, like right, like that's just not the way to go. That and again, it's unfortunate that this because it's funny because I used to go like, oh man, it's just that this just happens to Amphibia, but now it's like, okay, this actually happens to Gravity Falls. I'm like, I think it's yeah, it's affected how people who've seen in the past, uh, talk about it, and it's affecting how people who are new coming into the show who get frustrated when they find out the mystery plot isn't even that crazy, right? Like they realize, wait a minute, this is just a goofy summertime show. What do you? This is not what I signed up for. Like I've seen reactions like that.
And like going back to Gravity Falls, not Gravity Falls, going back to Amphibia, it's like,
Oh yeah, we got lost a little bit. But
like with regards to season three, like you can. I'm trying to think of something more like tangible for people, where it's like you have the season three ending of Amphibia and its messages. You can like, it's fine to say like, oh, this show did this better because like the show has dedicated more time to like to this theme. Like this is kind of a hot take, but it's like, whatever. Nick, what would you describe like the Owl House to be about?
oh man, that's
No,
you know
okay,
what, I'm
okay,
just
okay.
gonna
You
say
don't need to
the
answer that, but
last
you don't need to answer that. But
no
just
no no I get it. No, I got it. I got it. I think they got their message in the last few episodes. I think it's about this girl finding a place where she's understood. There, like it took them a little serious, but they got it.
yeah, so like, yeah, I agree. I think that that's what the Owl House is about, and it's like Amphibia isn't about that. Like that's what the Owl House is about. But I still feel like Amphibia covered that idea better than the Owl House.
Yeah,
And
they made a stronger story out of it. Like honestly, they made a stronger story out of it.
like I feel like you could make that case for Amphibia for like a lot of like a lot of things where it's like the show wasn't about this, but they did tell a more like cohesive story or like a more like impactful message around this sort of topic, even though it wasn't the focus of the series, just because the nature of the like Amphibia's ensemble cast is very like because it has like different age groups and like they have like different messages, you can kind of like cover a lot of ground. So I do think the advantage Amphibia has to other shows is that because like, the main characters have like a really old guy, a really young girl, a baby, and like a kid. Like when you talk about another show and its themes, because Amphibia is like has like a lot of like universal like messages, you can kind of like pull from there and kind of just like sneak something into like another show, just like
Yeah.
friendship or like any like adult themes. Like you can kind of like use Hop Hop as your like kind of as your like segue into more mature themes, like about like adolescence and like all that midlife crisis stuff. While like all the stuff with and all the stuff with Anne, Marcy, and Sasha about like friendship and stuff, that's like very, I think, already talked about a lot. But when you bring up like the Sprig and Polly stuff about like just like Sprig, also they gave him a lot of like I feel like when people talk about like Sprig losing Anne by the end of the series, I feel like that's or Sprig letting go of Anne. I feel like that's very underutilized by people when talking about the show. Like just the idea of
Yeah.
like like adoring this person and then eventually kind of like having to understand to like let them go. And I know like the story was told through like Marcy as well, but because like Marcy and Anne were already established as friends for like for this like, for the story, like it doesn't really carry the same. Even though I see a lot of people talk about like Marcy learning to like let go of Anne and Sasha, I feel like people kind of sleep on using like Sprig, like meeting Anne and like becoming close to Anne and then having to say goodbye being a more profound like topic to talk about when you have like these discussions about like friendship or whatever, like the themes of the show. So like I feel like
Yeah.
if you start talking about like if you have if there if you happen to be like in a discussion about like Amphibia and the Owl House and you're talking about like certain stuff and like maybe someone's talking about like the relationship like Stan has with Dipper and Mabel or Ida with Luz, you can kind of like bring up like Hop Hop and Anne and the kids. It's like that's a very like, and you can kind of make the case how that's like a much more like stronger relationship than the other shows that I've mentioned. Like if that's what you want to like try and accomplish, and like getting just if you're just trying to argue about like Amphibious quality, you could always like kind of like bring that kind of stuff up, not to like dig on the other shows, but just kind of like point out like the strength of Amphibia.
Yeah. Because it hurts to miss about it, but I think like we both know. I think Amphibia. It's weird. It hasn't been thoroughly as digested as other shows have. I feel like there isn't as much talk about its themes in comparison to again like that really well executed dark fantasy that people wanted, right? Like it's interesting. Like it's interesting that you can really smell out the thing the thing that people specifically want from the show right now.
Yeah, and so I don't want to say like, oh, you shouldn't compare them. Like shouldn't compare shows because like comparison's very like useful for getting a point across. So like it helps like set up someone else's perspective. So you can't like to just write that off. I don't think is very like productive if you're
Yeah.
trying to pitch the show to someone. So like I do think as long as you're kind of like as long as you sound like you have like a point, you should be fine. Like I'm not gonna be like, oh, like Amphibia shit because like
Yeah.
they didn't have like the Polly and Spring episode, unlike Gravity Falls, where they always had Stan interact with the kids for so many episodes, which isn't the case by the way, but that's another topic.
Let's make it Gravity Falls.
No, that market is oversaturated. But but yeah, that I think that's all I really have to say about that point. Like comparisons are great. Just be just be smart about how you use it.
Yep.
And I think that concludes our three tips for season three discussion. Nick, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I know I said it a million times, but guys, I know you skew young, but remember, as you grow up, think about intent and the specific topic they're trying to like cover, right? Really try to break things down to that, and you will not be able to go wrong, right? And if you do want to see things stringent on your point of view, that's perfectly fine. Just, be sure to acknowledge that, right? Because this is more than just like being a robot and trying to say like, oh, look what this amazing work has, look how this amazing work has transformed storytelling in the last 100. No, no, no. We're all here to just enjoy stuff. But I think like it's just easier for everyone to get along if we just, really try to be honest as possible. So yeah, that's all I got.
All right, thank you, Nick. And that concludes this week's recording. Thanks for listening, and see you guys next time. Say goodbye, Nick.
See ya.
See ya.